Everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Roundtable. Today, we're going to be talking about purely nutrition today. So, me, Sam, and Leanne are going to be taking more of the athlete perspective today, as well as things that we see from a coaching perspective. But Shania can definitely chime in, give us the nitty gritty about macronutrients, reasoning, rationale, everything to do with that. So, what we have first today is, I guess I wanted to bring up how nutrition is this huge, I guess, cornerstone of making progress. Like the big three is always going to be the training itself, recovery, and that splits into your sleep and nutrition, right? So considering that nutrition plays such a large role, how does it change considering everyone's got different goals? So some people might be trying to make weight. Some people are looking to purely improve their performance. People are moving up a weight class, as well as people trying to maintain, right? So Shania, if you want to kick things off, I guess what's the main things that you're looking out for when you are looking at someone's nutrition for the first time?
Yeah, so I think the first thing would be like the biggest like misconception with nutrition is that it's just like calories in versus calories out. I think that's like what a lot of people who either haven't received coaching for nutrition before think that's kind of just all it is, but that's very much just like a very broad term. I would say to do with like all of those points in terms of like making weight, improving performance, any sort of weight class, moving up or down, you got to look at, especially for us, like sports specific, it's looking at like meal timing and frequency and like the types of foods that people are eating, and how we can like restructure all of those things to one, have that like end goal of like improving performance in training and on the platform. So I would say like majority of my work with like all my clients is around like that, and looking at what like I guess what more so what they are doing and just how we can make it better rather than like what they aren't doing, like unless it's like a really big thing. It's like, most people are like eating 3 meals a day, they're getting like, a certain amount of protein, carbs, fats in. So it's like they're already doing that. It's just how do we make it better and how do we fix like the one percenters to improve everything as a whole?
Yeah, I think that raises a good point because like for myself as an athlete, and I work with Kedrick, like there still is that focus on like, I guess, ensuring you're meeting your macros. But once that box is ticked off, it's then trying to optimize all the little things around that as well. Right. So I think for me, I definitely came in with the misconception that like macros is king. And as long as I just get the macros in, like that's fine. As I started to like figure out like, all right, making sure like my meal timing is on point, as well as like the quality of food as well. Once that's like controlled for, like I feel amazing. Right. But I now kind of
Yeah.
see like macros as that like baseline, and then you add things on top of that.
Yeah, well, like that's just like the way I think powerlifting is changing too. I feel like, potentially back in the day, it was very just like quantity of food, like, dirty bulks, like I'm just going to eat whatever I can to eat, like, you know, size moves size, like the bigger you are, the stronger you're going to be. Whereas I think the perception now is that a lot of athletes are still prioritizing health and body composition as well as performance. And it's like, how can we, or like, what are the variables that we need to consider to make sure that athletes are still healthy outside of powerlifting, but performance is trending in the direction that we need it to trend in.
Hmm. Um,
Yeah, I've done, I think I've probably noticed like how important the small things are over the last like 8 to 10 weeks, in terms of how much of a difference it can make on like how you feel and your performance. So like in terms of my like rough timeline, obviously going up to 120s, I was working with a sports dietitian. A lot of the food was planned out, so it was pretty good quality. Focusing on, eating more. That obviously helped me get to 120, 120 plus, like, 123, 124. There was that middle period there, probably like the last 2 years, where I think I got too comfortable in terms of nutrition just being calories or macros. So like I was almost like getting comfortable in the sense that I was just making it fit and not really like I thought I was looking at like good quality foods, but like really it wasn't. So like things like, making grilled fit, making my muscle chef meals fit, like it was very much just kind of like these easy kind of food options. And as long as it kind of sat well in my fitness pal, I was happy, or like guesstimating and things like that.
Yeah.
Flashback to now, so coming back of Worlds, making this decision to stick to 120s, I knew that I had to have a closer look at my nutrition in terms of first losing a little bit of weight, because I started sitting a little bit heavy. So I started working with Tom, and now it's kind of like, okay, I'm in a deficit. I'm focusing on losing weight to read body composition, but I'm looking at meal timing. So I'm looking at, because I'm reduced carbohydrates, I'm having more of them around training. I'm looking at steps, the quality of foods, so foods that are going to help keep me fuller, even though I'm on reduced calories. And I think like looking at all these things on top of just macros, and sleep as well, like good quality sleep. Like I'm in a deficit right now. I'm chewing through like a decent amount of training volume, but I'm recovering well, I'm getting stronger, and I'm feeling pretty good. Whereas like previously, I feel like if I was doing it how I was before, in terms of not really looking closely at these small kind of factors and doing the training I'm doing now, I think I'd be feeling pretty beat up.
Yeah, well, I think that like ties into like, you can either get a meal plan or you can work with macronutrients and like calories in, right? Calories out. So I think macronutrients from like my perspective as a coach is it's a huge educational tool. Like a lot of people don't understand what's in food. They don't understand serving sizes. They don't understand like the type of carbohydrates or the types of fats that they're eating. Are you having like saturated, unsaturated, trans, poly, like all the kinds of fats that you can get from the food that you're eating. So for me, using macros as a coach is that it's educating clients around like what you're actually eating and like what is in the food that you're consuming, and then how do we manipulate that, like you said, Sam, as like around training. So it's like, working with clients, it's like if you train in the afternoon at like more so nighttime, it's like, we're likely going to be looking at structuring your food where it's like you're having more fats in the morning and snacks and maybe lunchtime, and then you're leaving more of your carbohydrates that you need and protein to before, during, and after training. And that's going to look very different to somebody who either trains in the morning or more so like the middle of the day, where, if you train in the middle of the day, you might have a little bit of fat at breakfast. You're going to have primarily, protein, carbs, snacks, pre-train, during training, lunch, and then you're going to have more fat at dinner, because the type of macronutrient and the macronutrient split of every meal that you have is it's either there to provide you with fuel and energy to train and then recover, or it's there to keep you feeling full for longer, which is like where you need that is going to change on what your schedule and structure looks like day to day.
Yeah. And just to break things down really quickly, like in terms of macronutrients, you've got your carbohydrates. That's what you're mainly looking for fuel, right, Shania? Yeah. And then you've got fats, and then you've got protein.
Pretty much. And then like, I think the one big thing with like the athletes as well is like within carbohydrates, it's like, are you having high GI or low GI carbs? Because your high GI carbs are the ones that are going to be just like broken down like really easily. So it's like your cereals, your white bread, crumpets, anything that's just like in the body's going to use as like fuel straight away. Or you're having more of like the complex carbs that take longer to break down, that, have fiber in them, like brown rice, pastas, all that kind of stuff. So it's like, that's like breaking it down even further into like getting people to think like about what they're having before training. And then again, like even during training, it's like your Powerade powder, like different forms of like sugars so that the body can break it down at the same time. And you're getting like multiple different, I guess, energy sources from like different types of foods.
Yeah. Sorry, jump in, Leanne.
That's all right. I was just going to say how I think it's interesting, like, especially when, if you might not be following people on, I feel like Instagram is a really easy way to like educate yourself on nutrition things. I've just found as an athlete myself, but if you're kind of stepping away from that, it's like, it's just the awareness around nutrition. Like you kind of don't realize until and like until you actually go and find that education either from nutritionists, someone like Shania. So yeah, I guess it's like such a big key that so many people don't actually realize how much it can affect your performance until you actually start implementing it, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. I want to bring it back to what Sam mentioned before. Like now that you're in a deficit, you're, I guess, in a net catabolic state. So like you really need to ensure like everything's on point to ensure that you're recovering, right? I kind of want to flip it on its head and kind of look at the perspective of being in a surplus and a deficit. And I guess for you, Shania, when you are looking at nutrition coaching, do you kind of see like behavioral patterns that people kind of fall into, or just like, I guess, archetypes of people that go into a surplus and do it really well versus don't do it that well, versus people who go into a deficit and do it really well versus don't do it very well?
I would say as a very broad start to that question, it's like people who are in a surplus or like they're sitting at maintenance, they get very lazy. Like we get lazy in the sense that we just it's like you just get into your routine, you eat the same thing every day. You're not prioritizing the things that you need to prioritize because like one, I guess like you don't have to because you are in a surplus. So like prioritizing food around training or recovery, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to happen, but it's like it's still important to do. But people just get lazy with it. Whereas when it becomes like when someone moves into a deficit, like they immediately become like more switched on. They prioritize, like Sam said, like recovery, their food around training. You know, they've got to understand like you will get hungry. So the feelings of like they're more in tune to what their body needs because they're listening to like hunger signals and, you know, are you feeling irritable? Are you getting tired? Like, you know, when do you need your food? I would say that people that are in a deficit are better at splitting their food up throughout the day. Whereas again, like a surplus, it's like meal timings kind of just go out the window. It's like they'll just eat big meals rather than like eating frequently throughout the day. They're sort of like probably like the big things that really stand out to me as a coach that like kind of come up depending on when someone's at a different sort of stage. I think from an actual perspective of like viewing nutrition as, or like nutrition coaching as valuable, it's like people who are either maintaining a weight class or in a surplus, they don't see the service as valuable anymore. I think that's just like a natural sort of switch. Whereas like when they're in a deficit, like they see it as more valuable. Whereas I think again, that's just like a misconception of like the many things that we do with somebody, whether you are in a surplus or you are in a deficit. Like it's important to have a coach if that's a priority to you, no matter what stage you are in.
Yeah. Sometimes I go through like these phases where I do have like a mini cut and then I'll be in a surplus as well. Like, because now that I'm moving up a weight class, like it's good to, I guess, control fat gain as well. So I do see the perception, like my own behaviors start to change over time when I do go through these phases. And it's interesting because like you mentioned, and I guess it's throwing myself under the bus, like when I do go into that surplus, it's like I just switch off and I'll just eat whatever and I'm not focusing so much on quality of food. And I guess that's, in a sense, it's not maximizing the potential gain because it's the quality of food isn't as high. Whereas sometimes in a deficit, I might be actually reporting feeling better as well, just because I'm focused on eating my fruits and vegetables, splitting up my my meals throughout the day. So those all play a huge factor in just how you feel as well. And that's going to relay into performance when you do train.
100%. Yeah. I think there's more consistency across the board when people are in a deficit as well, like in terms of like an actual week view. Like I think when people are in a surplus, like naturally everyone, like, you know, we all kind of work this Monday to Friday in some form. So it's like Monday to Friday is very, very structured in a sense of like you either start work at a certain time, you know, you have lunch at a certain time, XYZ. Whereas like on the weekend, I find like for clients who are in a surplus, like the weekend is the one where you either like sleep in later. So breakfast is later, then you're like, oh, I'm not hungry. So I'll just like skip lunch and have like, you know, an afternoon snack. And then dinner becomes, but you've got to, people don't necessarily look at nutrition as this, like, it's an accumulative thing, just like training fatigue. It's like every day kind of feeds into the next. So it's like for someone in a surplus, if your Monday to Friday is like, you're nailing that, but then like your Saturday, Sunday is like, you know, you're less maybe like 300, 400 calories, that's going to come out on like your Monday, Tuesday training session. Whereas people who are in a deficit, it's like, because you don't just have a surplus of calories to eat, they're staying structured 7 days of a week. And it's just like, they're actually probably seeing better results. And as you said, like they're reporting, feeling better, like energy levels are like more consistent. Whereas I think with the clients who are in a surplus, it's much more of like an up and down sort of feeling. There's a little bit more sort of fluctuations with that. But yeah, they would be like the big ones, I think, that I would see.
Yeah, that's.
Do you tend to?
Sorry, you go, Jay.
Do you tend to when like prescribing your calories to a client? Do you tend to like give clients, say, a target that's different during the week versus on the weekend, or do you kind of like look at it as an average?
It depends, I guess. I guess for some clients, I'll look at it as more of an average. So I guess I will definitely look at more of like a weekly average of calories than like day to day specifically, unless a client is, I guess, in a really large deficit. Because I think, again, like for a surplus, day to day variances are probably going to happen just with where they're at. I mean, day to day variances will happen with a deficit anyway, as well, with any client, because energy expenditure is different. Like hunger signals are different every day. But yeah, so for a surplus would definitely be more like weekly average, and then just like that education and that communication around, okay, we need to be a little bit more consistent on the weekend so that this is, where we are looking at moving our weekly average up week to week or fortnight to fortnight. Whereas deficit, I'm looking more at like day to day and like just, naturally communicating the importance of like keeping day to day as consistent as we can.
Yep.
Do
you want to? Yeah, you guys, Sam.
Just on that note of like Monday to Friday and the weekends, I was definitely guilty of that. Like when I was kind of like in that comfortable maintenance surplus stage, like when I was in just above 120. I think it just reminded me, I think back to like when I was in that comfortable stage, I used to roll into Monday feeling like so sluggish and tired, and I would feel tired on like a Monday high bar and tempo bench session. Whereas now it's just kind of clicked, whereas I'm feeling pretty good on a Monday now, like on my first day of training. And I think, yeah, going back to that kind of optimizing as much as I can in this deficit, I'm being a lot more consistent now on the weekends in terms of like, okay, it's Saturday, Sunday, I need to keep getting this food in. Like I can't just sleep in and then just not be kind of eating throughout the day because it's a weekend, or like I can't hit Sunday, have a whole day on the couch, hit 1,000 steps, order a cheeky Nando's for lunch while I'm watching UFC, and then think that's okay. Like I used to think that was like rest, whereas now I'm very much in the mindset like, okay, I need to keep these steps up. I need to keep getting my calories in. I think, yeah, it's just clicked that I'm rolling into Mondays now feeling heaps better.
Well, yeah, I think like that ties into like what LJ sort of said. Oh, actually, you didn't say on the podcast, sorry. You put a post up or a story up saying like steps is like a really easy and like important thing for us as powerlifters to do, not only from like a recovery sense, but also like from a nutrition sense. Like, it's a very easy tool that you can manipulate for somebody to either, like if you need to move them into a deficit, it's like if you don't want to take any more calories away, you can just increase someone's energy expenditure through steps, or vice versa. Like, if somebody is moving up a weight class, there's always going to be talks and feelings around like, how you're feeling and like feeling fluffy, or, certain sort of feelings will come out with that sort of process. So having something that they can kind of focus on that isn't necessarily there to increase energy expenditure, but it's just there to help with digestion and make them feel better, that's a very easy tool to like use. And I think that also kind of ties into what you said, Danny, where with what you're doing with Kedrick, where even though you're moving up a weight class, there's still periods of time where you're either in a surplus or a deficit. Like, I think that's a really important thing to like point out, is that even if you are moving up a weight class, like moving up a weight class takes like so much time. Like it won't happen in like, 1, 2, 3 months. Like it's going to take a pretty solid amount of time to properly fill out a new weight class. And that is where you can utilize moving into like a surplus and a deficit with a client to just, not only keep things interesting, but also to make sure that like you're kind of covering all bases, I guess, with that process.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to go up a weight class, I think, can also be quite like mentally taxing in terms of being in a surplus for such a long time. I know personally, like trying to eat so much food every single day, like it's taxing and it's hard. And it's almost as hard or harder than a deficit, I find.
I would say harder. I would hands down say it's harder than being in a deficit.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like you're never hungry. Like, a lot of clients who are moving a weight class, like it's like you got two things, right? Like if you're in a surplus, like clients are either like, I'm never hungry, I'm force feeding myself, I don't even enjoy the feeling of eating food anymore because I'm eating because I have to get the calories in, versus like being in a deficit where it's like people are like, I'm hungry all the time and I want more food. And it's like, there's obviously everyone's going to have their feelings towards both, but I would be with you on that, LJ, where like personally it's like eating all the time is like more tiring than having no cows.
Yeah, right.
you've just recently gone up a weight class yourself, right, Shana?
Yeah.
So how's things behaviorally for you? Like, you've got all this information. Do you feel like there's still periods of time where you do fall into, like, I guess quote unquote maladaptive patterns, or you're like pretty
Yeah.
spot on with it?
Nah, definitely. I think even though I'm like a nutrition coach, you know, like I'm never gonna listen to myself. Like that's just like human. Like I've got my own like coach that I work with, Dakota, in Melbourne. I would say like at the start of it, like I didn't really like it definitely took a few months for me to like really feel the feeling of like getting full and like feeling fuller. And I would say like around about now, which it's probably been maybe like I would say maybe like 3 months-ish, roughly. Like it's probably taken about this long to get to the point where like I'm either noticing changes in terms of like belt getting tighter, like the knee sleeves are harder to get on because I'm like just thicker and like more muscle. You know, like clothes feeling a little bit tighter, which are like not bad feelings at all, to be honest. Like they are a little bit like there's days where like, you know, anyone has challenges with it, but at the same time, I just remind myself of like performance and how much stronger I know I'm getting or have already gotten from it. So and it's like just communicating with your coach. Like I've communicated to like Dakota where it's like I'm at the point where I want to chill here and like feel out where I am now in this weight class, you know, get a bit of like consistency here. And then we can kind of keep going. So yeah. But
Yeah,
I think it's normal.
nice.
All thoughts and feelings are normal.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I guess where I wanted to move this next was, so we've covered, I guess, like where someone's grand scheme goal is, where they're moving up and down, things like that. But when it comes to the day of competition, or when you work with higher level athletes where they're at a, I guess, higher stakes competition, it's a completely different ball game, right? Like it comes down to the minutes in terms of fueling themselves. So what are things that you're, I guess, looking out for when it comes to game day coaching?
In terms of like nutrition.
For nutrition, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very individualized on this. Like I think I know that Kedrick, from what I've heard, like from I guess like James Lee, like he's mentioned it, and like what I've seen, Kedrick sort of prescribes like a certain amount of carbohydrates per hour. I'm a little bit individual, like in that where I find some clients really struggle to eat on comp day, right? Like some clients are either really nervous that they just like can't stomach food. So if I know a client is really nervous and they can't stomach food, I'll usually try and use a day in their training throughout the week that I know is like in SBD, where we will trial different things. So we'll trial different food sources. We'll trial getting them to eat a little bit more frequently throughout the day. You know, we'll trial different like caffeine intakes to find what works for them. And then I basically, if we find something that works and they perform really well and they don't feel either too full, or I guess for like women, in terms of like incontinence, like there's not too much liquid in their body, we will take note of that and we'll basically just replicate that on the platform, irrelevant, I guess, of like how many grams of carbs that is per hour. That's what I find I do a lot with like my women, like a lot of my female clients. For any of like, I guess like my male clients, I'll do a similar thing, but I will kind of give them a certain amount of grams per hour that I'd want them to try and hit at the same time. So it's kind of like, okay, this is what I'm sort of wanting you to try and hit. If you can't obviously stomach all of that, then it's still a guide for them and they can kind of just take it as it comes, you know, each hour or each sort of lift and attempt on comp day. That's kind of would be more so like that would be for people either making weight or not making weight, obviously. Making weight more specifically is then obviously around when weigh-in is at, like what their post, you know, weigh-in meal is and how we're going to rehydrate them, like specifically, like they're the kind of guys who we need to obviously be a little bit more like strategic with in terms of like getting them to rehydrate as fast as possible in like the most efficient way.
Yeah. And I think that plan needs to get installed like a week out as well, right? Because sometimes you're going to be running different protocols to, I guess, cut them into comp, because that's a major factor when I think of a nutrition coach. Like when you are at a competitive level, most people are cutting a larger percentage going down into comp, right? So it definitely helps to have someone who's on point and able to just tell you what to do, essentially, because there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to acute weight cutting strategies. Do you want to explore that a bit more?
Yeah, so I guess like in terms of like an acute weight cutting strategy, like we kind of have like, well, we've kind of probably got what, like 3, 4 main sort of variables that we can manipulate. Like you can do a water load and like a water manipulation on its own. You can do like a gut cut or a low residue diet on its own. You can do these together with each other combined. You can also manipulate someone's macronutrient intake alongside a gut cut where you're doing, I guess, decreasing carbs, increasing fat. So that's going to just help with more high calorie dense foods and just removing or decreasing the total amount of volume of food going to somebody's body. And then you can use sodium on the last day or fasting periods if need be. I would say from like my personal experience as a coach, so far with clients, I've never had to use fasting periods or any other sort of like external manipulation like spitting or anything like that with my clients. I see a lot of success with just doing water, fiber, and the macronutrient manipulation if needed. So I would say based off that, like depending what somebody needs, or like if I say like the most common is water and like low fiber, low residue together, I would say. So that would be like a rehydration strategy would look like obviously rehydrating with electrolytes, salts, and water kind of mixed in one. And then a post meal being mainly just protein and carbs without fiber, so that we're not having like a lot of fat that's just going to like run through somebody, or like obviously not having a lot of fiber in one hit that's just going to have the opposite effect and like clog somebody up basically.
Yeah. Sam, you're smiling. Do you have anything to add to that?
I was literally just, when you're talking about that, I was just getting flashbacks from Worlds. It was actually quite scarring. I was smiling.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck, because that was the first time that I had to spit, and it ended up being the first time that I saunaed as well.
Yeah.
So I'm normally, so with my weight cuts, so like last week 2 years, like 4 competitions in total, 5 competitions. It's been water load, gut cut, a little bit of sodium manipulation. So basically that's worked out really well until Worlds where I did that, but then I also had to fast, go liquids only actually as well. And spat the night before, spat the morning of, and then also saunas. Do not recommend.
Yeah. I looked at you, Smile, and I had an idea of what you were thinking of, and I was thinking back of like when I had a period like that as well. And I think I don't think I've said it publicly, but like 2022 nationals when I had to make weight, that was a period of time where I was like, all right, I probably didn't look after my macronutrients enough for a long period of time to the point where like my starting weight was like heavier than what it had been previously. So what we did the night before, I was like sitting at like 68.5-ish, and I knew I had to be sitting at like 67 or something like that, something disgusting. So like Steve let me borrow his car and he drove around with me blasting the heater, but I knew like it was going to be there for a really long time. So I was like, all right, Steve, you go in. Thanks for letting me borrow the car. I'll just sit in here and I'll do it. So sat in there for a bit. It got to the point where my phone overheated, so I couldn't like, I guess, defocus myself. And then I was just there sitting with blasted heat, and I knew I had to be there like for 45 minutes, an hour. So I just sat there singing, what did I sing? The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Like I counted, I sang The Lion Sleeps Tonight, both verses, and I was like, all right, that's about a minute. I need to do that 45 more times. And I just kept going, and then yeah, it's not a fun feeling.
No,
That's definition of insane.
Like, yeah, like that would just tie into as well. Like I think that like using external methods isn't probably spoken enough about either. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with having to either spit. Like I think if I was to rate it in order of like what I would want a client to do, it's like spitting is always first, like sauna comes second if you have to, and then like doing a hot bath or sitting in a heater is like, if you've got to do that, like just compete as a guest, I feel like, because you're just going to feel like shit anyway. Like it's just terrible. I would say like, you know, I think the more experienced you get potentially, or like the heavier you are trying to fill out a weight class, you are probably going to have to use another method to make weight. You know, like I think that's just kind of, I would say that that's just like the natural progression, you know, unless it's just like you're going to move up a weight class. If you don't want to stay there and stay, you know, being competitive in the weight class you've chosen, that will just likely come about. But I would always say like, and I think I've always, I said this to Sam when he was at Worlds, but I think as a coach, I would say like, if you know you're going to have to sauna earlier rather than later, because if like don't sauna the night before or the morning of. Like if you're working with the coach, or like even if you're not, like this is a good piece of advice. It's like if you're getting to like that Wednesday, Thursday, and you're like competing on a Saturday, and you know that your body weight probably isn't trending how it normally is, or you're not dropping down fast enough, like get in a sauna earlier rather than later.
Yeah, that's one thing I kind of regret from that whole experience, just because it was like just the stress of that morning. Like I'm at Worlds, I've never sauned before, I've just spat the night before. I had to go in there, and like the sauna that I went into, there was like no phone reception, so like I didn't know like how long to be in there for. I didn't know how much I was losing. There was some chick in there like just having like relaxed sauna, loving life. I was like in there with a little cup trying to spit without like making her see that I was spitting. It was just pure like panic and stress mode for a little while there. So I think I agree on that. Just sauna early, get it off so you can relax.
Yeah. I think when it does come to like acute cutting like that, like for the person that's going through it, like brain just switches off. So I think having someone who's looking at that and is responsible for looking at it from a non-emotional perspective, I think that's like like I would arguably say essential to getting it done properly. Like you could
100%.
do it in a way where you're doing it yourself, but it's like Sam's stories and my story, it's like it's just not going to be beneficial for performance.
No, I think like at the end of the day, like if you're a competitive athlete, or even if you're not competitive, like if you're an athlete who's like, you know, you're trialing it to see whether like it's something that you know that you want to do, because like some athletes just can't handle cutting weight, which is fine. But if you're doing it to trial it, I think it's like you guys would be able to like agree on this. It's like when you're like making weight is the first job. Like you don't think about anything else until you've made weight. Like you don't think about what you're going to hit. You don't think about what the warm-up's going to feel like. You're not thinking about squat openers. You're not thinking about anything except like, I need to make weight. I need to see that number on the scale, and then I can worry about the rest after.
Yeah.
So it's like you said, it's like having someone who like is the coach and who's looking after that. And, you know, whether it's like via message or it's like your coach is in person and you're seeing them, you know, that week of, it's like knowing that it's being handled and there's somebody external that's viewing the data and the weight throughout the whole week and the changes, I think just like takes that stress away for you guys to be able to just prioritize what you need to prioritize.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was a good way to end things. Thanks for jumping on, everyone. And I guess to summarize everything, like there's always going to be the long-term plan, and that's going to be fundamental to everything, right? Like I guess the past 10 minutes only applies to when you get to a level of competition that acute cutting actually applies. However, there's still things that you can apply and nut down and get the 1%ers right before you start looking into these other strategies. But yeah, thanks guys for listening, and we'll see you in another episode of the Roundtable.